There's a moment, a very specific moment, that every Allied soldier who faced the MG-42 remembered for the rest of their lives. Not the sight of it, not the silhouette of the German gunner behind the bipod, but the sound. A tearing, ripping shriek. A mechanical scream so fast, so unnatural, that most first-timers mistook it for a malfunction, or a new kind of artillery. 12, 13, 1,400 rounds per minute. A weapon that didn't roar, it buzzed, like an industrial saw chewing through metal. And that's exactly why they called it Hitler's Buzzsaw. But behind the terrifying reputation of the MG-42 lies a paradox that few people today fully understand. It wasn't just the most effective machine gun fielded by the Wehrmacht. It was also one of the most problematic, the most expensive in ammunition, the most logistically punishing, and, in some ways, the most counterproductive weapon in the German arsenal. This is the story of how a single gun became the spine of German infantry tactics, while simultaneously becoming a burden that the German war machine could no longer carry. If you're new to the channel, and you enjoy diving into the kind of history where technology, strategy, and human decision-making collide in unexpected ways, consider subscribing. Because today, we're going to peel back every layer of the MG-42, how it was born, why it dominated, and why it nearly broke the very army that used it. To understand why the MG-42 was created, and why it became such a radical departure from German engineering tradition, we have to start with the weapon that came before it, the MG-34. In the early 1930s, Germany was rearming in secret, pushing its industry to catch up with the rapidly changing face of warfare. The MG-34 was the first true universal machine gun, a single weapon intended to replace light and heavy machine guns at once. On paper, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was a high-precision diva. The MG-34 was built like a Swiss watch on steroids, parts machined to tight tolerances, surfaces polished, mechanisms demanding meticulous assembly and care. German engineers were proud of it, extremely proud. But the battlefield doesn't care about elegance. When the Wehrmacht rolled into Poland and France, the MG-34 performed well. But when it hit the dust, mud, and extreme temperatures of the Eastern Front, something alarming became obvious. The MG-34 was too good for war. Its tight tolerances jammed easily. Its complicated milling slowed production. And its reliance on highly skilled labor turned it into a bottleneck in a country preparing to fight on multiple fronts. By 1941, Germany wasn't just fighting armies. It was fighting time, resources, and industrial limits. Germany needed a machine gun that could be produced faster, cheaper, with less skilled labor, in far larger numbers, and still deliver the devastating firepower the German infantry doctrine relied on. The MG-34 could not meet these demands. It wasn't a bad weapon. It was simply the wrong weapon for the war Germany was about to fight. By mid-1941, German industrial planners had reached a chilling conclusion. If they continued producing the MG-34 at the same pace, the Wehrmacht would be critically short of machine guns within a year. Why? Because the MG-34 required hours of precision machining. It used expensive alloys, and it demanded a level of craftsmanship that Germany could no longer sustain as the war expanded. Factories were losing skilled workers to the front. Raw materials were under pressure, and production lines were too slow to keep up with the losses from combat. The German army didn't need beauty. It didn't need perfection. It needed output, something rugged, something stamped, welded, and hammered together fast. Something that didn't need a master machinist to assemble. A machine gun built not for a parade, but for a desperate, grinding industrial war. And so, almost reluctantly, German engineers began to break with their own tradition. The era of polished steel was ending. The era of stamped metal plates welded into shape was beginning. That shift, that philosophical break, is what opened the door to the MG-42. A weapon that didn't just fit Germany's situation. A weapon that would redefine automatic fire for the next 80 years. When German engineers finally sat down to design a successor to the MG-34, they weren't trying to build a masterpiece. They weren't aiming to create the most accurate or refined weapon. Their goal was something much more urgent, much more brutal. A machine gun that could be mass-produced fast enough to keep up with a total industrial war. And that single mission, the speed of production, shaped everything about the MG-42. The engineers at Mauser and Grossfuss understood that precision machining was now a luxury Germany could no longer afford. What they needed were industrial shortcuts, processes that could turn cold sheets of steel into finished weapons in a fraction of the time. Enter stamping. For decades, stamped parts had been considered cheap, inelegant, even crude. Not something worthy of German engineering prestige, but war doesn't care about prestige. Stamping allowed parts to be pressed into shape by the thousands, with unskilled labor. Welding replaced intricate assemblies that once required expert machinists. Suddenly, the production time for a single machine gun dropped from 150 hours to just 75. It wasn't just a technical victory, that was a strategic revolution. The MG-42 was a weapon designed not in a workshop, but on a factory floor. Everything about it, from the skeletonized barrel shroud to the simplistic trigger group, told the same story. This is a machine built for quantity. And yet, it ended up being a masterpiece anyway. If the MG-34 was a precision instrument, the MG-42 was a force of nature. The engineers didn't simply accept a higher rate of fire, they purposefully pushed it to extremes. Why? Because German infantry doctrine didn't see the machine gun as support. They saw it as the center of the squad. The riflemen weren't the main force. The machine gun was. So, what happens if your main weapon fires twice as fast as anyone else's? You change the battlefield. At 200,500 rounds per minute, the MG-42 didn't fire in bursts. It created a wall of bullets, a curtain of steel, that no soldier wanted to run through. The sound was so fast, so continuous, that American troops compared it to a zipper being pulled across the sky, a buzzsaw cutting steel, a ripping canvas effect unlike any Allied gun. This insane rate of fire wasn't wasteful engineering. It was a deliberate tactical choice. Suppress the enemy so hard, so fast, that they can't raise their heads long enough to shoot back. And it worked. Oh, it worked too well. One of the most surprising facts about the MG-42 is just how durable it was, despite being built with cheaper processes. Stamped doesn't mean weak. Not when the weapon is over-engineered where it counts. The MG-42 could be dropped, kicked, buried in mud, frozen, overheated, rained on, used as a club, and it would still run. Soviet soldiers famously reported that the gun seemed immune to the Russian winter. American GIs wrote home describing it as the one sound in combat that makes everyone hit the dirt instantly. It was simple to maintain too. The quick change barrel system was elegantly brutal. A trained crew could swap a red-hot barrel in 6 seconds, without tools. Everything about this gun screamed efficiency. And yet, this efficiency hid a looming problem. The MG-42 didn't just fire fast, it devoured ammunition like nothing else on the battlefield. But we'll get there soon. When prototypes were finally sent for field testing in 1942, the reaction inside the Wehrmacht wasn't uniform. Some commanders were ecstatic. This is the weapon we've been waiting for. Others were alarmed. How are we supposed to feed this monster with ammunition? One German officer famously wrote in his evaluation, "The MG-42 provides overwhelming firepower. It also creates overwhelming logistical requirements. but there was no turning back. The weapon proved too effective to ignore. Units equipped with the MG-42 were suddenly outperforming MG-34 teams. Suppressive fire became shockingly fast. Enemy advances broke apart under the sheer volume of bullets. The machine gun wasn't just a weapon, it became a tactical engine. And that scared the German high command as much as it impressed them. To understand why the MG-42 became what it was, we need to understand German military thinking. The German squad didn't fight around the riflemen. It didn't fight around maneuver. It didn't fight around numbers. It fought around the machine gun. The squad was the machine gun's escort. The riflemen were its moving protection. Every tactic, advance, defense, or retreat revolved around the MG. So the logic was simple. If the machine gun is the heart of the squad, make that heart pump as violently as possible. That's why the MG-42 wasn't just another weapon. It was the center of German infantry identity. An identity built around shock, speed, and overwhelming fire. But every extreme advantage carries a hidden cost. And the MG-42 had many. Costs that would soon haunt the Wehrmacht as the war dragged on. Costs that would reshape tactics, supply chains, and doctrine. Costs that would turn this brilliant weapon into one of the most problematic machines the Reich ever fielded. If there's one thing that makes the MG-42 unique in the history of small arms, it's this. The MG-42 didn't fit into German tactics. German tactics were built around the MG-42. To the Allies, a machine gun was a support tool. To the Germans, it was the primary weapon. Everything else was supporting it. This single doctrinal difference changed the face of infantry combat. The standard German infantry squad, the Schützengruppe, consisted of 9-10 men. But one of those men overshadowed all the others, the machine gunner. He wasn't just another soldier, he was the axis around which the entire unit turned. The structure looked like this. One MG-42 gunner, one assistant gunner, carried spare barrels and belts, one T2 ammo carriers. The rest, riflemen whose job was to protect the MG. The MG-42 was the squad's hammer. Everyone else were the hands holding the hammer. This wasn't symbolism, it was strategy. It meant that the squad advanced in a wedge that protected the MG-42. The squad defended by building firing positions for the MG-42. The squad retreated only after the MG-42 laid down suppressive fire. When an American unit fought Germans for the first time, the after-action reports often said, "They move like the gun is their commander." And in many ways, it was. The MG-42's blistering rate of fire made it the perfect weapon for German infantry doctrine. Move fast, suppress fast, exploit fast. Suppressive fire wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to freeze the enemy, to force them down into cover. With 1,200-500 rounds per minute, the MG-42 could pour out so much lead that Allied soldiers often believed more than one gun was firing. American troops described the experience like this. You don't hear bullets, you hear a sheet of sound. The effect was psychological devastation. Advances broke apart, platoons stalled, troops misjudged enemy numbers, communication collapsed under panic fire. At the tactical level, even a single MG-42 could control an entire sector, and a pair of MG-42s placed to create overlapping fields of fire could shut down a front line. German manuals even taught the concept of the machine gun nest as tactical fortress. Build a position so strong that the enemy must spend 10 times the effort to remove it. And at the center of that fortress stood the MG-42. The sheer violence of MG-42 fire created effects that military planners hadn't predicted. 1. Short engagements. Enemy troops couldn't stay exposed long. Firefights became fast, brutal ambushes. 2. Suppression over precision. The MG-42 didn't need perfect aim. It threw so much metal that any exposed line became uninhabitable. 3. Counter-assault dominance. When Allied forces attempted to close the distance, the MG-42 shredded gaps and halted momentum. 4. Night fighting. The gun's rate of fire allowed German units to dominate night ambushes and defensive positions. The Allies quickly learned a harsh truth. Charging an MG-42 head-on was a suicide mission. Here lies the paradox that changed everything. The MG-42 was so powerful, so fast, and so mechanically intense that it created entirely new vulnerabilities. A barrel firing 1,200 rounds per minute becomes white-hot in seconds. German doctrine demanded change barrel every 250 rounds during sustained fire. More often in defensive positions. Always under pressure, always under enemy fire. Assistant gunners were trained to handle glowing barrels with asbestos gloves, and even then, accidents were common. This was the gun's greatest flaw. An MG-42 squad could burn through its entire ammunition loadout in under 5 minutes of continuous fighting. This meant constant need for ammo carriers, overloaded supply lines, units running dry at critical moments, difficulties maintaining momentum during long engagements. It was like driving a race car in a marathon. While the MG-42 could dominate a field, its extreme rate of fire made it harder to adjust fire, pick individual targets, keep sustained accuracy, conserve ammunition for later phases of battle. A highly experienced gunner could tame the weapon. But the war didn't give Germany enough experienced men. As casualties rose, new crews struggled to balance firepower with discipline. The result? Tactical brilliance began turning into operational exhaustion. German infantry assaults relied heavily on the MG-42. The typical flow of attack was MG-42 suppresses riflemen, advance, MG-42 leapfrogs forward, sets up again. Repeat this fire and movement cycle created relentless pressure, but it required perfect timing, experienced gunners, steady ammunition resupply, weather that didn't clog the gun. When all those factors aligned, the MG-42 created unstoppable momentum. When they didn't, the entire squad stalled. This was the fatal flaw of a perfect machine. It demanded a perfect system around it. Allied reports throughout the war show an almost irrational fear of the MG-42. Some units believed the Germans had multiple guns per squad. Others thought it was a new experimental weapon. Some believed the Germans were doping their gunners to handle the recoil. The psychological impact was enormous. One U.S. soldier wrote, "When you hear that thing, you stop thinking about anything except staying alive." Even the best trained troops hesitated before advancing into MG-42 fire. And hesitation kills momentum. That effect was priceless for German defense, and catastrophic for Allied plans. The MG-42 was a marvel of engineering. It was terrifyingly effective in combat. It was durable, reliable, and devastating. But it had one fatal flaw, one that no amount of engineering brilliance could fix. It consumed ammunition at a rate the German supply system simply could not sustain. And this flaw didn't just create inconvenience, it created a logistical crisis that rippled across the entire Wehrmacht. Let's put the numbers on the table. A single MG-42, firing at 1,200 rounds per minute, could shred through. An entire ammo belt in 3 seconds, a full squad resupply in under 5 minutes, a company resupply in half an hour of sustained fighting. German infantry doctrine demanded heavy firepower, immediate suppression, rapid tempo of combat. But doctrine doesn't produce bullets. Reports from the Eastern Front are filled with commanders begging for more ammunition. One officer wrote, "The MG-42 gives our squads the strength of a platoon, and the appetite of one too." The German supply system had never faced a weapon like this. The Eastern Front was a nightmare of distance, mud, snow, and broken infrastructure. Getting ammunition to the front lines was already hell. The MG-42 made it worse. A single MG-42 crew required belts, spare barrels, barrels carriers, ammo boxes, tools, maintenance kits. Everything had weight. Everything had to be carried. Everything slowed movement. And since the gun burned ammo so fast, every crew needed multiple carriers. Supplying MG-42 units forced. Trucks to run longer horses to carry heavier loads, logistics columns to stretch thinner. The Soviets targeted supply routes with mortars and snipers. Ammo trucks were high-priority targets. A single destroyed truck could leave an entire company without machine gun ammunition. By 1943, Germany was struggling with copper shortages. Creating thousands of additional cartridge cases per day for MG-42 fire became increasingly difficult. The gun was winning tactical battles, but losing the strategic war of supply. The MG-42 wasn't hard to maintain, but it was hard to use well. Experienced gunners could fire controlled bursts, conserve ammo, change position fast, replace the barrel in seconds, and adjust fire based on enemy movement. But by 1943, the veterans were dying faster than Germany could train replacements. New gunners fired too long, overheating the gun, emptied belts too fast, failed to control the recoil, burned out barrels prematurely, and exposed their positions with long bursts. A machine gun is only as good as the person behind it. In inexperienced hands, the MG-42 became inaccurate at long ranges, noisy and revealing, wasteful, difficult to reposition, prone to overheating. The paradox deepened. The MG-42 required elite skill, but the war was giving Germany teenagers. Across the Eastern and Western fronts, diaries and letters described the same pattern. Soldiers recount firefights where the gunner panicked, held the trigger, and burned through the entire ammo supply before the real assault even started. Carrying the MG-42, tripod, barrels, and belts made fast retreat nearly impossible. Many crews were captured or killed because they physically couldn't leave quick enough. The quick change system was brilliant, but only if crews had enough replacement barrels, and many didn't. There are countless stories of MG-42 teams dominating the battlefield, and then being wiped out after running dry. One veteran wrote, "The MG-42 makes gods out of men until it turns them into targets." The more Germany relied on the MG-42, the worse the strategic picture became. More ammo required more supply strain, more training needed, more barrels to manufacture, more trucks to move ammunition, more fuel to move the trucks, more men to carry the belts, more casualties from slow retreats. It was a chain reaction. The MG-42 was too fast for its own army. Its firepower outpaced German. Industry logistics, manpower, transport capacity, command structure. It was a race car in a mud war, a masterpiece trapped in a collapsing system. The MG-42 didn't just shape German infantry tactics. It shaped the tactics of the entire Allied war effort. Because once American, British, and Soviet troops encountered it in full fury, they all reached the same conclusion: we have nothing like this. The MG-42 wasn't just another enemy weapon. It was a problem that demanded new strategies, new training, and new doctrine. Some Allied units feared tanks, some feared mortars, but nearly all of them, from Italy to Normandy to the Eastern Front, feared the Buzzsaw. When MG-42s first appeared in mid-1942, Allied troops didn't know what they were hearing. American soldiers in North Africa reported a ripping cloth sound, a zipper across the horizon, the sound of metal being shredded. British troops described it as a circular saw cutting oak, a roar that comes in waves, a weapon that sounds like several guns firing at once. Soviet troops simply called it Szwejna maszynka śmierci, the sewing machine of death. The psychological effect was immediate and powerful. Many platoons froze upon first contact, unsure how many enemies they were facing. The MG-42 didn't just dominate firefights, it dominated morale. As soon as the Allies captured their first MG-42s, the weapons were rushed to testing centers. The British Small Arms School, American Ordnance Corps, and Soviet intelligence all performed independent evaluations. They all made the same notes: extreme rate of fire, excellent reliability, fastest barrel change system in the war, efficient use of stamped parts, surprisingly ergonomic. But they also noted the flaws: enormous ammo consumption, barrel overheating, difficulty in controlled bursts, wasteful for long engagements. Still, the admiration was real. One British report states, "The MG-42 represents the future of automatic weapons manufacturing." One American officer wrote, "If our industry could tolerate this rate of fire, we would build nothing else." But they couldn't. And that's where the story becomes interesting. Several Allied nations attempted to reverse engineer the MG-42. The Americans tried converting the MG-42 to 36 Springfield. The result? A disaster. The longer American cartridge and differences in recoil behavior caused constant misfeeds, catastrophic jams, violent recoil impulses, broken receivers. The T-24 was abandoned after only a few prototypes. British engineers admired the MG-42 but rejected its philosophy. They preferred accurate, slow-firing, controllable weapons like the Bren. A British officer famously said, "The MG-42 is not a machine gun, it is a hose." They gathered data but concluded their industries couldn't support such a design. Post-war, Sweden adapted MG-42 concepts into the KG-M42 and M44 prototypes, but even they never matched its exact rate of fire. Only post-war NATO, with German involvement, created a true successor, the MG-3. The MG-42 forced wholesale changes in Allied tactics. Here's how. Allied squads began spreading out much wider than before. Instead of 5-6 meters between soldiers, now it became 10-15 meters, sometimes even 20. Why? Because MG-42 bursts could wipe out tightly packed teams instantly. Charging a German MG-42 position head-on was suicide. So the Allies adapted. More smoke grenades, more artillery preparation, more suppressive fire from multiple angles, use of flamethrowers and close assault teams. American platoons adopted the two-prongs tactic, flanking from both sides simultaneously to overload the gunner's reaction time. The best counter to an MG-42 was a sniper. Allied snipers were specifically taught to look for muzzle flashes, barrel-changing movements, belt carriers, the assistant gunner's silhouette. A single well-placed shot could eliminate a gunner and neutralize the threat. Tanks began taking on more direct fire support roles, blasting MG nests, suppressing known machine gun positions, providing cover for infantry movement. In some units, eliminating MG-42 teams became a higher priority than dealing with infantry squads. Here are authentic sentiments reconstructed from letters and reports. The quickest way to die is to underestimate that gun. One MG-42 feels like 3 of ours. The Buzzsaw teaches respect the moment it opens up. A single German gunner can delay a whole company. Every hedgerow might hide a buzzsaw. We advance like every step is our last. Если слышишь пилу, ложись. Встанешь через секунду, тебя уже нет. If you hear the saw, get down. Stand up 1 second later, and you're already gone. The MG-42 became one of the most universally feared weapons of the war. The MG-42 didn't win battles by itself. It didn't win campaigns. It didn't win the war. But it changed the shape of the war. Because the moment the Allies understood the MG-42, they trained differently. They attacked differently. They maneuvered differently. They planned differently. Entire divisions rewrote their field manuals. Assault troop training doubled the hours dedicated to machine gun countermeasures. The MG-42 became not just the backbone of German infantry, it became the invisible instructor of Allied armies. When Germany fell in 1945, most of its weapons disappeared with it. The Tiger tanks were scrapped. The STG-44 scattered across distant conflicts. Most small arms production lines went silent. But one weapon did not die. One weapon was simply too ahead of its time to vanish. The MG-42 didn't end with the war. It transformed, adapted, resurrected. It became one of the longest-living machine gun designs in human history. This is the strange afterlife of Hitler's Buzzsaw. When Allied engineers reevaluated the MG-42 after the war, without battlefield stress, without panic, something interesting happened. They realized the MG-42 wasn't just good for Wehrmacht, it was good for the next 50 years. Why? Because it answered three eternal requirements of infantry firepower: high volume of fire, durability under field conditions, cheap mass production. This combination was rare, and in the emerging Cold War, it was priceless. Thus began the machine gun's second life. In the 1950s, West Germany rearmed under NATO. The new Bundeswehr needed a general-purpose machine gun, fast. Many prototypes were tested, but none matched the old MG-42. The only real problem? It was chambered for the wrong ammunition. So Rheinmetall modernized the weapon to fire. First 7.62 NATO, MG-1, then improved metallurgy, barrel life, tripod, feed, MG-3. Everything else, the receiver, the bolt, the philosophy, remained nearly identical. This wasn't a new gun, it was MG-42 reborn for the post-war world. The MG-3 went on to become one of the most widely used NATO machine guns of the entire Cold War. It served, and still serves, in Germany, Italy, Turkey, Norway, Greece, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, South Korea, Spain, и десятках других стран. On tanks, in infantry units, with paratroopers, on naval vessels, the MG-3 proved adaptable to everything. The design of the MG-42 was so fundamentally sound that it barely needed modification. It was simply that good. Even nations that didn't adopt the MG-3 ended up copying aspects of the MG-42 philosophy. Stamped receivers, a norm in modern machine guns, quick-change barrels, mandatory and general-purpose MGs, roller locking mechanisms, used in dozens of post-war firearms. High sustained rate of fire as a shock suppressive tool. Now a core doctrine of NATO infantry. The MG-42 didn't just survive. It reshaped the very idea of what an automatic weapon should be. It pushed the world away from precision-machined art pieces toward industrial, modular, battlefield-ready machines. If the MG-34 was the last machine gun of the 19th century, the MG-42 was the first machine gun of the modern world. You might expect that new calibers, new materials, or new tactics would make the 1942 design obsolete. But the opposite happened. The MG-42 design endured because its internals were brutally simple, its stamped parts were cheap, its rate of fire remained unparalleled, its quick change system was better than most modern guns, its reliability in dirt, snow, and mud was legendary. Even today, many machine guns are slower, heavier, or require more maintenance than the MG-3. The MG-42 didn't age, it matured. If you traveled back to 1942 and told a German engineer that his weapon, built for a collapsing fascist state, would one day become a staple of Western democratic armies, he wouldn't believe you. But history has a sense of irony. The MG-42, born from shortages, desperation, a dying industrial philosophy, and a collapsing war machine, became a NATO standard, a global export success, a decades-long benchmark in machine gun design, and one of the most respected firearms ever built. A weapon born in darkness that lived most of its life on the other side. So, now we stand at the end of the story. A weapon born in wartime desperation. A machine gun that terrified every soldier who ever heard it scream. A masterpiece of stamped steel, durable, simple, brutally effective. But also, a weapon that punished the army that created it. A weapon that demanded more ammunition, more logistics, more manpower, more training, and more discipline than a collapsing Reich could possibly provide. This is the paradox of the MG-42. It was the perfect weapon for a war that Germany could not afford to fight. The MG-42 delivered unmatched suppressive fire, terrifying psychological dominance, incredible reliability, rapid production, the ability to command a battlefield. But it also demanded supply lines Germany couldn't sustain, ammunition factories Germany couldn't feed, trained gunners Germany couldn't replace, mobility Germany couldn't maintain, and strategy Germany could no longer afford. The weapon outgrew the army. It exceeded the limits of the doctrine that birthed it. And as Germany faltered under the weight of a long, grinding, multi-front war, the MG-42, once its greatest tactical asset, became a strategic liability. The world had never seen a gun so powerful, and may never see one like it again. Despite its flaws within the collapsing Wehrmacht, the MG-42 left a legacy that is almost impossible to overstate. Its ideas, not just its hardware, changed modern warfare. Every nation studying automatic weapons after the war came to one inescapable conclusion. Stamped guns are the future. Quick change systems are essential. Universal machine guns are the new standard. The MG-42 pioneered the general-purpose machine gun concept long before NATO adopted the term. By the 1960s, nearly every major nation had shifted toward lighter receivers, higher rates of fire, modular rolls, mass production-focused designs. The MG-42 forced the world forward, because the MG-42 wasn't just a gun, it was a symbol of industrial pragmatism, a blueprint for post-war design, a psychological weapon, a tactical revolution, an engineering milestone. It represents the moment when warfare shifted from hand-crafted machines to industrial weapons built for industrial conflict. It represents the brutal clarity of total war. And it represents a strange, uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the best weapon is the one the army itself is least prepared to use. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the MG-42, into the weapon that reshaped doctrine, industry, and the psychology of soldiers across continents, consider subscribing. Because on this channel, we don't just talk about weapons. We talk about the ideas behind them, the mistakes, the breakthroughs, the unexpected consequences. And next time, we're diving into another story where engineering brilliance collided with the brutal realities of war, in ways no one expected. Stick around. There's so much more history waiting to be uncovered.